Who's wrong and who's wronger? In this corner, followed by millions, James the Exploding Unicorn Breakwell. And in that corner, ignored by millions, Steve Dash Rinko Levers.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Wrong and Wronger, where you can rest assured the next 201 episodes will be exactly the same quality as the first 201 episodes.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll give that a second to soak in. Why don't you? But I am one of the co-hosts and the one that I know all of you tune in each week to see. I'm Dr. Steve, and he's the other guy that all of you tune in because sometimes you need to ruin your appetite when you're trying to lose a little weight. He is James the Exploding Unicorn Breakwell. And James, how are you doing today?
I am here for another week of just sustaining your insults with good humor and class, because we all know what my role is here, and it's just to let it bounce off me. I'm good.
James, I have in my grubby hands.
Ooh.
And this, by the way, is the podcast where we talk about things that don't matter to anybody. However, James, they matter to more people than we thought they did.
Oh, where are you going with this?
I have in my grubby hand a list that I compiled of every listener who wrote. Now, there's no way to verify their information as being accurate. However, there were 5 people who said,
Whoa.
I have listened to every single 201 episodes of Wrong and Wronger.
Are you going to
5.
read off this list of honor and or shame?
Well, Judy P. leads the list, of course.
Obviously.
Because Judy P. not only listens and or watch. No, I'm sorry. She doesn't only listen or watch. She listens and watches, which means she has us twice a week with the same show, James.
I mean, I can't even imagine listening to our voices and then watching our faces to go with the voices. That would be just going from disappointing to disappointing-er. Like, holy cow, she has got to be up for sainthood somewhere there.
Now, right below Judy P. is Susanna Mendoza, who is significant because she took time out of her day to write individually to each of us to let us know that she has listened to every episode.
That was right. I told you excitedly that we had another one, and then I found out she was already on your list as well. So for a second, we had 6 people who had listened to every podcast, but we are back to 5.
Now, honorable mention, if we go win, place, and show, goes to JDB, who goes by MeOhMy23 on Twitter. JDB insists that the show is posted in a timely manner every week, because if we're even a little bit late, and some weeks we have abandoned the show completely for the sake of our own mental health, but sometimes we're just a little late in getting it up. JDB is on it, saying, hey, where's my Wrong and Wronger? So we'll put him on the podium or her on the podium as well.
I mean, that's good that somebody actually cares. Although I will say that when we're going to be late, or when I'm going to be late with my half of it, I actually message Judy P directly, because I do not want to ruin her entire evening. Yeah, I sent her a direct message on Twitter, because as far as I knew, there was only one person out there waiting for the video, and sometimes I'm just tired, Steve. I'm tired of life. I'm tired of you.
Listen,
and it's like, I'm like, I'll be all the way upstairs in our bedroom, and I'm like, oh no, I didn't post that. Do I really want to walk all the way down those stairs and post it right now? And no, I do not. So I just shoot Judy P a message and say, hey, go on to bed. It'll be up in the morning.
Now, is Judy P gracious in accepting your explanation, or does she do the fine, one of those kind of moves?
I think she's devastated, but it might be performative devastation for our benefit. I don't know that she actually has that much of a emotional stake in it.
Again, I keep track of these, James, because another good name when you and I put a band together, performative disappointment. All right, and then the other 2 on the list, I just don't know very well, or I'd be happy to give them some kind of accolade, but Jacqueline Schmidt and Deb Eschweiler also took time out of their day to write and say, hey, I too have listened to all 201 episodes of Wrong and Wronger. bringing the total to 5.
If you will indulge me for a moment of unjustified optimism here, it's possible that we might have even more people who've listened to every episode, but they rightly feel shame at that fact and did not want to point it out to us. So we have at least 5 people who are proud enough to admit it, but we could possibly have a few more. I know you're out there, or at least I choose to believe you're out there, and your secret is safe with me.
You know, whenever we record the next episode of 10 Minutes, it will be our 150th. So I believe that is a sesquicentennial, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow, I did not know that term. We are piling up these podcast episodes for no gain. It doesn't help us, it doesn't help the audience, and yet we just won't stop.
Hey, that's actually not true. Just this very morning, one of my clients said, "Did you know you have a podcast called 10 Minutes to Save Your Marriage?" And of course, I did what I always do, which is, no, not me, different Steve Olivas, I can't imagine. And he said, "Man, I've binge listened to almost all of them. They're great. I played a few of them to my wife. I think it's really helping." So he found value in what we do.
Wait, let me backtrack for a second. Were his exact words, "Did you know that you have a podcast?" Like, I'd been secretly recording you and you weren't aware that you were on there.
Yes, I said I have these private phone calls where I pour my heart out to Breakwell. No, he was talking, that may have been me summarizing for comedic effect, but there was an episode of The Commute that he wanted to listen to because he wants to go into a field that I had somebody on, and apparently he did a Google search of me and was sort of surprised. So it was one of those spontaneous exclamations that may have come out a little bit incorrectly on his side, but it was pretty close to, "Did you know you had a podcast called 10 Minutes to Save Your Marriage?" And I said, "That wasn't me." No.
I hope 10 Minutes was higher in the Google results than The Commute. I choose to believe that's how that happened, that we were like result number 700 on Google, and The Commute was like 701.
Well, if you search my name, I can't imagine 699 that would land above either of those.
Man, how low does your life have to sink that you're Googling Steve Olivas?
I don't know how to respond to that exactly, James, but surely you've Googled yourself.
I
Come
mean,
on.
unless it's like to find out if you're on some sort of watch list, like dangerous persons, no-fly list, is Steve Olivas on there? I could get that, but beyond that, I think the less you know about Steve Olivas, the better.
Well, 350 plus episodes would suggest you feel the opposite.
I don't think we can figure out what I feel at this point. I'm clearly just going through the motions and don't have the courage to end something that should be ended. But
I think it's Stockholm Syndrome. You are secretly in love with me. That's what it is.
Oh, you should hear the sigh every time I hear the phone ring at our appointed scheduled podcasting recording. I shrivel up a little bit inside. But I did actually have something I wanted to talk with you about today. So I guess it's just as well that you didn't blow this off. Yeah. As much as we enjoy patting ourselves in the back for having 5 entire listeners, and again, kudos to us for that, I think it's important that we discuss something that actually has some parts we can argue about. And today I wanted to bring up Cursive because I had to learn it in school. I never write. Well, actually, I do sometimes use it a little bit if I'm taking notes. I mostly print, but sometimes I accidentally slip into Cursive, but mostly to sign my name. But kids today don't learn Cursive, which makes sense. But then I wonder, if they have to sign an important legal document, are they going to be printing with 3rd grade handwriting? I don't get it. I don't know how we can totally eliminate that. Even when you use an electronic signature, it usually imitates cursive writing on there. And can they just not read their own handwriting, or do they just guess and assume it means what it means? I don't know. What are your thoughts, Steve?
Let me go back to something you said as you were opening this, James. If you were writing notes for our show, for example, like Steve said something that you would like to keep in perpetuity, you would print every letter?
So I'm glancing out at a notepad that I keep for purposes outside this podcast because I have to date never taken one note for this podcast for any reason. But
hey, I have performative despair. Come on.
Looking at my notes, it's mostly, it starts out print, And then every once in a while, if I'm writing fast, it kind of slips into cursive, and then it goes back to print. I don't.
That's the point.
Yeah, and I think, if I was really taking notes, like I prefer to use voice to text, or I take notes on my phone and a document I call Scratchpad, and so it's never ideal if I'm using pen and paper. But yeah, I start out printing, I absolutely do, and only slip into cursive if I have to go fast.
Why do you do that?
You know how little thought I put into my writing? Right now is the most I've ever thought about it, the past 30 seconds of this conversation. But I think it comes, I don't like to write in general because I hold my pen wrong. So you're supposed to hold, let's see, I've got a pen right here. So you're supposed to hold it, and I know you can't see me, but you're supposed to like balance it against your middle finger, I think, somehow. And instead, I squeeze it between my middle finger, my index finger, and my thumb, like at the tip. I have like a death grip on it. And it's a very inefficient way to hold it, but I am way too old to change how I hold my pen. Like, I cannot write the other way at all. My illegible handwriting becomes even more illegible. It looks like I'm like a toddler trying to write with mittens on. So yeah, I get this death grip, and so the less I have to write by hand, the better. Like, at some point, I can't even read my writing. And I look back, I mean, I went to college in the dark days, which really shouldn't have been that long ago. But I remember the primary means, like, you go to class and you take notes in pen and paper. It's like, how stupid and inefficient is that? I went to school in the age of laptops. Why did I not just type everything out? Or better yet, why did the professor not just email us a PowerPoint and skip the whole shebang? But you know what? That's a whole different discussion. Let's stick to cursive for now.
Wait a minute. You can type fast enough that had you been taking notes during your English literature class or whatever you English majors take, you would have been able to keep up without completely botching what you were typing?
I think like most normal people, I can type like 5 times faster than I can write. I type lightning fast.
Kidding.
I write entire books. I spend my Sundays writing 2,000-word news articles that I just create out of thin air. I mean, I type all the time. I live and die by my typing. And yeah, by comparison, pen notes are just horribly inefficient. And if I'm going fast, like if I look back, like half the time, even I can't read them. And that really defeats the purpose. And if I can't read it, like if I'm writing a message to somebody, they definitely can't read it. So that's a total waste.
So let me ask you, boy, I got more questions popping up. Quick basic one. Did no teacher ever try to correct your pen grip when you were a kid?
I went to a very permissive school early on. I don't know if there was one of those.
I thought you were going to say promiscuous. Holy
definitely
crap.
not.
Thank you for pulling that out.
Definitely not promiscuous. No, that Catholic school was not so promiscuous. At least not till later on. Early ages, very much not so. But I don't know. It just, I didn't realize till later on that I was holding it wrong. But I think the other way, it seems like you just don't have enough control over the tip of the pen. It seems like it can just shift around all willy-nilly. So I don't know that that's ideal either. I think both ways are bad, but my way is probably a little worse because it takes more finger strain.
Wow. And then second question is, if you type something, part of why I think writing is still, it still has utility is when you write something, you're using several different mechanisms in your brain at the same time. And so it creates redundancy and allows you better recall. If you type something and you write something, do you believe you would have identical recall?
Absolutely. Because I mean, sometimes I don't even type it. When I do voice to text, I'm just speaking and it goes onto the page more or less in the right form. It probably gets it 95% right. But then I find that when I go through my second draft, I don't actually necessarily reread what I typed or I did voice to text in the first draft other than just kind of glance at it. I almost retype it from scratch, but I have the confidence that it's there if I need it as a guide. So in that sense, I remember what I just said and put onto the page. So I think it works there. You know, this just occurred to me. I was briefly a newspaper reporter, and when I did that, I didn't use voice recording. I also took notes, and that's a nightmare because I would get back and I have to put this stuff in print then, so it has to be accurate, especially like the spelling of names and things. And I had to go and figure out what I wrote to myself while having a conversation with somebody. Like I was incredibly unsuited for that profession. And I did it with the most archaic piece of technology possible, like short of just trying to carve what they were saying onto like a cuneiform tablet.
I'm fairly certain you made that word up. And So, when you voice to text, do you write your books that way, or do you, or your newsletters or your books? When you're writing a tome, are you voice to texting it?
For the first draft, yes. Well, you write books now,
Wow!
But I mean, the
Wow!
hardest draft is just to get something on the page, to get that
Yes,
basic
yes.
structure. And
Give
so,
birth.
yes, and the blank page is intimidating, and you're like, if you're typing, if you stop, you think, what's next? I got to get it perfect. But as you know from these podcasts, I can just talk. You can just talk. This is an ability we have. And so if I need to explain what needs to happen, I just flip open voice to text and I just talk. And half an hour later, I've got 2,000 words, and they're garbage words, but they're there. And then I move on to the next draft. And it's like, hey, I've got a basic structure. I figured out what I wanted to say. It's not perfect, but the big ideas are there. And now I can go through line by line and actually make it good. And I think if I do a first draft voice to text, I think it probably cuts off half the time. So for my last couple books, I didn't do it with my very first book. Voice to text wasn't as much of a thing back then. But yeah, I do the first draft for every single chapter, fiction and nonfiction, voice to text, and then the second draft where I really go through and make it make sense. It comes together much faster.
Dang! I don't know if I would be able to do that. I've never tried it, but that seems like it misses something that I do while I'm typing, and I can't articulate what that might be.
If you used
Like
if you used voice to text to summarize your ideas, you could quickly write an essay and articulate it perfectly with voice to text. You would be shocked.
No, what I was having trouble articulating was what is happening when I'm typing that would be absent if I am doing voice to text. Because boy, oh boy, this is fascinating. I'm going to try this at some point. I don't think I'm brave enough to try it with a book, but I would be interested to know if I could write a column like this. And voice to text, you just do right on your phone, right? Like you don't even need another accessory.
I did do it on my phone, and then Android changed how the voice to text worked, and it will only record for like 60 seconds at a time, so it's not as good. So my preference now is to use this microphone I have here at my computer. It picks up sound much better. It's much more accurate. So it depends on where I'm at. If I'm on the road, I'll use my phone, but if I'm at home, I'll use my desktop with the microphone attached in. It seems to work much better.
You know, I can picture you just sitting and talking to yourself while staring into space at 1 o'clock in the morning. That pretty much sums up my impression of your life, James.
So when I'm on the road, especially like if we're in a hotel or something, I wake up early on Sunday morning and I got to throw that newsletter together. And in an ideal situation, I will just go out for a walk. And I will hold up my phone and I will talk out the entire newsletter and then come back into my laptop and type it out. But like this weekend, we went to a baby shower in Missouri and we had a hotel room and my kids got split. Some of them were my room and some of them were my parents' room. My parents went off to church. My youngest or my second oldest kid was still asleep in the other room by herself. So I had to go in there and I couldn't wake her up with voice to text. So I went into this hotel room, closed the door, and sat in the bathroom by myself, talking to my phone. And talked out that whole first draft. And it was super efficient.
This is like a scene out of the movie RV with Robin Williams, except he typed his entire report on his BlackBerry. But yeah, I can see that. Just you in a bathrobe sitting on the toilet. You know what? I'm going to strike that from the record.
I was fully dressed. I was decent. I am a professional here after all. But what I didn't do, and some people are crazy. This still exists in the world. Some people for their first drafts still write them by hand. Like you think you're old fashioned because you type your first draft. But like the really hardcore people, they have to have that connection. It's not really writing unless at some point it exists on pen and paper. And I think they're crazy. I think that is the most inefficient way. And actually, I was listening to a history book the other day about a guy who was, I think it was the Lawrence of Arabia. He wrote down, he lost an entire draft of his book that he had written by hand, had one copy, hadn't had anybody else copy it down, just like hundreds of handwritten pages, gave it to a friend. The friend left a briefcase on the ground with it in there, and it disappeared. All of his work gone. Like, I can't even imagine. I would be suicidal at that point. That is so much work, and I just, and that's not the only person that's happened to. But I mean, you imagine back in the day, you'd have to like pay somebody to recopy it by hand, and that sort of thing had to happen a lot. Like I save 25 copies of everything I type. I take zero chances.
Yeah, I have definitely built redundancy into how I save stuff now. In Stephen King's novel, The Dark Half, that was one of the things the main character would do. There was a particular kind of pad of paper and a particular brand of pencil, and he would write out his novels. The book never quite said how it turned into typewritten print that was actually published in the books that he wrote, but I imagine there was some intern somewhere that was laboriously transcribing from his handwritten scrawl into the written word on some computer screen, whatever the archaic versions of those were.
Yeah, that.
You know, when I was in high school, another story, sorry, that I was writing a novel and I had 105 pages written. And this was back when floppy disks were literally floppy. They were like 5.5 or 5.25 inches wide. I don't know if you even remember seeing those, James. Okay. And something screwed up. Like, those things were fragile and finicky and fickle and any other F word I can think of, because that was my mood. As soon as the disc was compromised somehow and I lost that book, and I lost the will to live for a while. That was a kick in the nards. And I never thought I'd write a book again. And yet here we are. Here I'm talking to an English major even. Oy vey.
Do you wish you had gone back and retyped it? Was it worth salvaging, or was it garbage?
It wasn't. My idea was good. I mean, I was driving by then. I was probably 16. I don't know if I was 17 yet. And I think I had pretty decent ideas. I had probably read 100 novels by then, horror novels, and it was a horror novel. And I think I was, at least the structure of how the story arc goes, I had in my mind. And I don't know what the right word is here. What the story was about, I think, was a good idea too.
So my challenge to you would be, why don't you resurrect that? I mean, you're on this big writing kick now. You write like 3 times as many books as I do. Why don't you, in between your other projects, write that horror novel? Just take another crack at it and see what happens.
As soon as one book of mine should be out by the end of June. Once I get a little bit of cachet on Amazon, I'm going to publish a novel that I have written already that I think is very good. And then I have another one that I'm about 80 pages in that I pulled off an old computer. I forgot I had even written, and I printed it out and read it and thought, this is actually kind of good. So I'll probably finish that one up and then self-publish it too. So this book, if the idea, I'd have to kind of go through and reconstruct the idea in my mind, but it would be third in line.
You are going to pass my book total in no time here, and that is a little bit upsetting, but at least you had to go through the trauma of losing an entire book. So I guess that balances out the karma a little bit on that scale. I knew you were prolific with the nonfiction. I had no idea you had the other stuff. You know that the idea of losing the book itself could be its own horror novel. I mean, that would be my nightmare. That would definitely make me wake up in cold sweat right there.
Yeah, except nobody could relate to that. Yeah, they're like, yeah, whatever.
I once almost lost a newsletter in the process of like copying and pasting it over. I did like Control A and Control C, and it somehow half disappeared in the transition. And that would have been probably 4 or 5 hours of work, and that was almost devastating. Luckily, I was able to pull it back. But I can't imagine losing 105 pages. It just I
still remember the number. Yeah.
It explains so much of what's wrong with you. Like, you never really recovered from that trauma. You're here, but you're not here. I get it now.
Man, I was a bright kid with a total upside potential back then, James. And then tragedy struck, and here we are.
Yes, the fallout of every bad decision and misfortune in your life is here on this podcast, which no fewer than 5 people have listened to every episode of. It could be more than 5, but it's not less than 5, and that's something.
Well, we don't know if the people were being truthful with self-reported data.
I mean, every episode does have more than 5 listens. So there are no episodes with 4 listens. If there was an episode with 4 listens, we could call them out. We would have them dead to rights.
Yeah.
But both the YouTube videos and the audio have at least 5. Not much more than 5, but they got 5.
Yeah. No, you're right. Well, there's no way to resolve this in any simple and quick manner, or any manner that is going to be funny enough to earn a spot on this show, because it's only the best for our 5 listeners, James. But let me walk us out of here. Until we meet again, you have made it to the end of another episode that, instead of Wrong and Wronger, we should have just titled it The Culmination. As James was quick to point out, this is the end point of every bad decision we've ever made. But until we make some more next week, this is Steve, Dr. Steve Olivas, for James the Exploding Unicorn Breakwell, saying thanks for watching. Thanks to the 5 of you for watching every episode. And until we meet again, always recall that 2 wrongs can make a right.